The rain came down in sheets. It wasn't the clean, life-giving rain of the old world. This was the Commonwealth's rain, acidic, grimy. It washed the filth from the rooftops only to deposit it in the flooded gutters below. I watched it from my office window in Diamond City. The neon signs flickered, their colors bleeding into the puddles on the cobbled streets. A city built in the husk of a baseball stadium. A pathetic attempt at civilization. People scurried below, hunched against the downpour, their faces grim. Each one a story, each one a potential client, or a potential victim. The world had ended, but human nature, in all its messy predictability, had not. Diamond City. They called it the Great Green Jewel, a ridiculous name for such a place. It was a cage. A slightly more comfortable cage than the wasteland outside, but a cage nonetheless. The sounds were a constant symphony of desperation. The clang of a guard's armor, the desperate haggling at the market stalls, the low hum of generators fighting a losing battle against entropy. From my vantage point, it was all a grand, chaotic play. I was merely an observer, a detective, a collection of wires and synthetic flesh with a penchant for solving puzzles that others couldn't or wouldn't touch. The rain was a fitting soundtrack for this world, a constant, mournful dirge. My office was my sanctuary, a cluttered mess of case files, spare parts, and the lingering scent of stale cigarette smoke. A habit I'd picked up, a human affectation. It helped me think, or perhaps it was just a way to feel something, anything that felt authentic. The rain tapped a restless rhythm on the corrugated tin roof, a counterpoint to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Time, a concept that had a different meaning for me. I didn't age, I didn't tire, but I remembered. Oh, I remembered everything, every case, every face, every lie. It was all stored away, a vast and lonely archive in my positronic brain. This case, however, was different. It wasn't just another file to be tucked away. This one had a name that resonated with a frequency I couldn't ignore. Kellogg. The name was a key. It unlocked a part of my own history, a history I hadn't chosen. The rain seemed to intensify, as if the sky itself was responding to the gravity of the name. A child was missing, a parent was murdered, and a ghost from a past that wasn't mine was at the center of it all. This wasn't just about a client. This was personal as it could get for a machine who wore a dead man's face and memories. The client was a vault dweller, fresh out of the ice, a walking fossil from a world that had burned. They spoke of a stolen son, a murdered spouse. The details were brutal but tragically common in this new world. But then came the name, Kellogg, a mercenary, a killer, the Institute's boogeyman, and for me, something more. The name echoed in the borrowed memories I carried. The original Nick Valentine, the pre-war cop, had been hunting a gangster. That gangster had hidden his secrets in a facility. The same facility where I was born, and Kellogg was modified. Our paths were intertwined by fate and forgotten science. My own memories are a fractured mosaic. There's the life of the detective, Nick Valentine, chasing criminals through the clean streets of old Boston. His life, his cases, his regrets. Then there's my life, waking up in a landfill, confused. A prototype synth with a dead man's personality imprinted onto my core programming. I found my way to Diamond City, took his name, his office, his coat. I tried to do some good with the hand I was dealt, but Kellogg was the man who killed the original Nick, or at least he was connected to the people who did. The file was more than a century old, but for me, the memory felt fresh, a cold spot in my programming. The client's story gave that cold spot a purpose. Before, it was just a piece of corrupted data, a ghost in my machine. Now it was a lead. Kellogg wasn't just a monster from the Wasteland's nightmares, he was a tangible threat. He had taken this person's child, Sean. He had walked out of Vault 111 and left a trail of death. This wasn't just about my past anymore, it was about the present. It was about a child. Justice for the dead is a noble concept, but justice for the living, that is a necessity. It is the fragile glue that attempts to hold this broken world together, however poorly. So I took the case. Of course I took the case. How could I not? It was a convergence of narratives, the client's quest for their son, my quest for an identity, and the ghost of a pre-war cop's final investigation. Kellogg was the nexus point, the variable that connected all the equations. Finding him wouldn't just solve the case for my client. It might solve something for me. It might finally silence the whisper of the man I was supposed to be, or at least help me understand why I carried his burdens. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt heavy, pregnant with the secrets we were about to unearth. The first step was information, always information. Kellogg was not an amateur, he was a professional. A ghost who moved through the Commonwealth leaving few traces. But no one is perfect. Everyone has habits, patterns, vices. My network of informants is my most valuable asset. Street kids, disgruntled guards, scavengers with sharp eyes. They are the eyes and ears of the city. I put the word out. Kellogg. A handsome man, they said. Old, but didn't look it. Always with a cybernetic dog. The details started to form a picture. A very dangerous picture. He was a creature of the Institute, their top enforcer. We gathered what we could. Sightings, rumors, old stories from caravan guards who were lucky enough to survive an encounter. Each piece of data was a breadcrumb. A single crumb is meaningless, but a trail of them can lead you right to the wolf's den. We tracked his last known movements from Diamond City. He had a house here, a quiet little place in the upper stands. We found it, locked tight. But locks are my specialty. Inside, it was clean, impersonal, except for one detail. A hidden compartment beneath the desk, a single cigar, an expensive brand, pre-war, a clue. The cigar led us to a new line of inquiry. Who sells such things? Only a select few. That led us to Piper Wright, the city's resident muckraking journalist. She pointed us toward the darker corners of the city's commerce. The trail was getting warmer, but also more dangerous. Kellogg wasn't just passing through, he had connections. He had history here. He was embedded in the very fabric of the underworld. We were not just hunting a man. We were poking a hornet's nest with a stick. Every question we asked sent ripples through the city, and I could feel unseen eyes watching our progress. The final piece of the initial puzzle came from Dogmeat, the client's loyal canine companion. A dog's sense of smell is a remarkable tool. It operates on a level of data processing we can barely comprehend. The scent from that single cigar was enough. The dog caught the trail. It was faint, diluted by the rain and the city's stench, but it was there. A thread of evidence, invisible to the human eye or even my own optical sensors. The hunt was on. The dog led us out of the city gates into the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Commonwealth. The game, as they say, was afoot. The trail led us to Good Neighbor, a wretched hive of scum and villainy, to put it mildly. If Diamond City was a cage, Good Neighbor was a pit. But it had one unique feature, the memory den, run by a woman named Irma. She dealt in memories, a dangerous trade. People went in to relive their glory days, to see lost loved ones. They came out hollowed, addicted to a past they could never reclaim. But for our purposes, it was the perfect tool. We had found a piece of Kellogg's cybernetics, a piece of his brain, and Irma could help us access the memories stored within, a direct line into our quarry's mind. The process was invasive, a crude fusion of technology and biology. I was the interface. My synthetic nature made me the ideal candidate to plug directly into the device. The client would be the passenger along for the ride. I lay back in the pod, the strange helmet lowering over my head. Wires were connected. A low hum filled the room, the sound of forgotten science groaning back to life. Irma's voice was a distant guide as the world dissolved into a sea of static. It felt like diving into cold water, a shock to the system, then a slow, disorienting descent into someone else's consciousness. The first memory flickered into existence. A child, Kellogg as a child, in San Francisco, before the bombs, a world of color and life. A stark contrast to the gray ruin we inhabited. He was with his parents. Happy. It was a simple domestic scene, a family, love. It was disarmingly normal. This was the foundation of the man, the person he was before the world broke him. It was a crucial piece of data. Monsters aren't born, they are made. And seeing this fragile beginning, this spark of innocence, made the monster he became all the more tragic. It was a glimpse of the man he could have been. We moved through his life. Each memory a stepping stone, his time in the NCR, his life as a mercenary, his family. He had a wife, a daughter. This was the key, the emotional core. He loved them, deeply, fiercely. This wasn't the cold, calculating killer we were hunting. This was a husband and a father. The memories were warm, tinged with a golden light. A life built in the ruins of the old world. A small pocket of happiness carved out of the chaos. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my circuits, that something terrible was about to happen. This happiness was a fragile thing, destined to be shattered. The next memory was a nightmare. The happiness was gone, replaced by smoke and blood. Raiders, a senseless attack. His wife Sarah was killed. His daughter Mary was taken. The scene was brutal, chaotic. I could feel his rage, his despair. It was a raw, unfiltered torrent of emotion that threatened to overwhelm my own processors. This was the moment, the crucible that forged the man we knew as Kellogg. He was no longer a husband or a father. He was a weapon of vengeance. His life was stripped of its meaning, leaving only a singular, burning purpose: find his daughter. We followed him on his hunt. He was relentless. He tore through the wasteland, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. He was no longer the soldier from the NCR. He was a predator. Every action was precise, efficient, and utterly ruthless. The man who had loved his family was buried deep beneath this new persona. He was becoming the monster. We saw him track the raiders down. We saw the retribution he enacted. It was not justice. It was slaughter. A cold and brutal cleansing that did nothing to soothe the fire burning inside him. It only fed the flames. Then came the Institute. They found him at his lowest point, a broken man with a particular set of skills. They offered him a deal, a devil's bargain. They had advanced technology. They could help him find his daughter. In return, he would work for them. He would be their hand in the world above. He accepted. What choice did he have? They took him in. They augmented him. Cybernetics, extended lifespan. They turned him from a man into a tool, a finely crafted instrument of their will. He became their monster, all in the desperate hope of seeing his child again. The final memory in the sequence was the most damning. The Institute. They had his daughter, but not to return her. They wanted her for her DNA, untouched by the radiation of the Wasteland. They saw her not as a person, but as a resource, a key to their synthetic human program. Kellogg had been a pawn all along. He had traded his soul for a lie. The memory ended with him looking at his daughter through a pane of glass, a silent, helpless observer to her fate. The man was completely and utterly broken. He had lost everything, twice, and in that moment, I almost felt pity for him. Almost. Exiting the memories was like surfacing from a deep, dark ocean. The air in the memory den felt thick, heavy with the psychic residue of Kellogg's life. The client was shaken. I was processing. The data was overwhelming. We had seen the man behind the monster. We had witnessed his tragedy. It did not excuse his actions. The murder of the client's spouse, the kidnapping of their child, those were unforgivable sins, but now they were understandable. Not justifiable, but understandable. He was a man shaped by profound loss, twisted by a desperate hope that was ultimately betrayed. A cautionary tale written in blood and chrome. This new knowledge complicated things. It's easy to hunt a monster, a mindless beast that kills for sport or instinct. But Kellogg was not that. He was a man who had once been good, a man who loved. The Institute had taken that from him, hollowed him out, and filled the void with their own cold purpose. He was as much a victim as he was a villain, a tragic figure in a grand, cruel play orchestrated by unseen masters. Does that lessen his guilt? Logically, no. An action is an action, but emotionally, it paints the entire affair in shades of gray. There is no black and white here, only sorrow. My own existence is a paradox, a machine with a man's soul. I walk the line between two worlds. Kellogg was a similar paradox, a man who had lived so long he had become something else, a human weapon stripped of his humanity piece by piece until only the function remained. He was a mirror, in a way. A dark reflection of what a being can become when their purpose is defined by others, when their identity is stolen and replaced. The thought was unsettling. It resonated with my own origins, my own struggle for self-definition in a world that saw me as little more than a toaster with a trench coat. The mission, however, remained unchanged. A child's life was at stake. Sean, Kellogg had taken him, and the memories had given us our final destination, a place called Fort Hagen. Kellogg was there, waiting. He knew we were coming. The memories showed us his path, and in doing so, they showed him ours. It was a trap. He was luring us in, but we had no choice but to spring it. The pity I felt for the man Kellogg once was could not overshadow the imperative to stop the monster he had become. The path was clear. The confrontation was inevitable. The journey to Fort Hagen was a grim pilgrimage. We left the relative chaos of Good Neighbor behind and ventured into the heart of the glowing sea's irradiated periphery. The landscape was a testament to humanity's folly. Twisted metal skeletons of cars lined the cracked highways. The skeletons of buildings clawed at the sky, their windows like vacant eyes. The air itself tasted of rust and decay. Every step was a risk. Feral ghouls, mutated creatures, pockets of radiation that could cook you from the inside out. The world was actively trying to kill us, a fitting backdrop for the task ahead. Dogmeat trotted ahead, a beacon of simple loyalty in a complex world. The client walked with a determined silence, their personal stake in this grim business etched onto their face. I walked with them, my metallic footsteps a steady, rhythmic beat against the broken asphalt. My thoughts were a whirlwind of data. Kellogg's memories played on a loop in my mind. The happy family, the brutal loss, the cold transformation. I was analyzing, cross-referencing, trying to build a psychological profile of the man we were about to face. To understand your enemy is to gain an advantage. But understanding Kellogg only brought a sense of profound melancholy. We navigated the ruins with caution. Ambushes were common. Desperate raiders, driven by hunger and chems, would prey on anyone foolish enough to travel the open roads. We dealt with them as they came. Swiftly, efficiently. There was no pleasure in it, just a grim necessity. Each encounter was a reminder of the world Kellogg had been forged in, a world where violence was the most common language, a world where survival often meant sacrificing the very things that made you human. We were walking the same path he had, in more ways than one. As we drew closer to Fort Hagen, the signs of his passage became more frequent. The bodies of raiders and mutants were strewn about, dispatched with a professional's touch. He was clearing the way, or perhaps leaving a message, a warning. This was his domain. We were entering his web. The fort itself loomed on the horizon, a concrete monolith against the sickly green sky, a pre-war military installation, a tomb. It was here that this chapter would end, one way or another. The air grew still, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the ruins. It was the silence before the storm.
Perfect.
The interior of Fort Hagen was a labyrinth of steel and concrete. It was cold, silent. The only sounds were our own footsteps echoing in the long corridors. The place was a fortress, designed to repel an army. But Kellogg wasn't an army. He was something more surgical. The fort was infested with synths, the Institute's plastic soldiers. They moved with an unnerving grace, their red optical sensors cutting through the gloom. They were obstacles, a test. Kellogg was watching, evaluating us. We fought our way through them, a desperate, violent ballet of laser fire and ballistic impacts. Deeper we went, into the command center at the heart of the facility. And there he was, Kellogg. He stood waiting, as if he'd been expecting us for tea. He looked tired. The years weighed on him, despite the Institute's life-extending technology. He wasn't the raging monster I had expected. He was calm, resigned. He spoke to the client, his voice a low, gravelly tone. He explained himself. Not to justify, but simply to state the facts as he saw them. He spoke of Sean. He spoke of the Institute. He spoke of a life spent in service to a lie. It was a confession, a final statement from a man who knew his time was up. The conversation was the real battle. The gunfight that followed was merely the conclusion. He knew he couldn't be allowed to live. We knew we had to stop him. There was no other possible outcome. He drew his weapon, a powerful revolver, a relic of the old world. The fight was brutal and short. He was fast, augmented, a seasoned killer. But we were desperate, driven by a righteous cause. When the final shot was fired, he fell. There was no triumphant cry, no sense of victory. Just the sudden, deafening silence in the room, punctuated by the hum of the computers. He lay on the floor, the life fading from his eyes. A man who had lived for over a century, whose life had spanned worlds, was gone. In his final moments, he gave us the key. A piece of his own cybernetics that would allow us to access the Institute. A final act of defiance against the masters who had used and betrayed him. It was not redemption, it was too late for that, but it was something. A final, meaningful act in a life defined by loss and servitude. We had our victory. We had the path to Sean, but the cost felt immeasurable. We stood over his body in the silence of the command center. Justice had been served. That's what they say, isn't it? An eye for an eye. A life for a life. The client had lost their spouse, and now Kellogg, the murderer, was dead. The equation was balanced. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a tragedy compounding a tragedy. Looking at the man on the floor, I didn't see a monster. I saw the sad, inevitable result of a broken world. I saw a man who had been a father, a husband, a soldier, and had been twisted into this. A cautionary tale. A ghost. The rain began to fall again outside, its faint drumming against the roof of the fort a somber percussion. It was as if the world was weeping for all of them. For the client's murdered spouse. For the stolen child. And yes, even for Kellogg. He was a killer. A villain, no doubt. But his story was a thread in a much larger, more terrible tapestry. A tapestry woven by the Institute, by the war, by the very nature of humanity itself. Killing him didn't solve the problem. It just removed one of the symptoms. The disease, the rot at the core of the world remained. We took what we needed and left him there. A forgotten relic in a concrete tomb. As we stepped out of Fort Hagen, the rain washed over us, cleaning the blood and grime from our clothes, but not from our consciences. The world looked the same as it had before. Gray, wet, melancholy. Justice is not a restorative force. It does not bring back the dead. It does not heal the wounds of the past. It is simply a final cold calculation, a line drawn in the sand. We had crossed that line, and now we had to live with what we found on the other side. Our quest was not over. We still had to find Sean. We had to face the Institute. This was just one act in a much longer play. But as we walked away from that fort, I felt a change within my own circuits. The ghost of the original Nick Valentine felt a little more distant. The weight of Kellogg's memories, however, felt heavier. I had sought justice, and I had found it. But I had also found a profound sorrow. The sorrow of understanding your enemy. The sorrow of knowing that in a different world, under different stars, he might have been a friend. The rain continued to fall, washing all the stories away into the mud.